Alright, 3A, we're going to look at two ways to factor, the greatest common factor and then factoring by grouping. So hopefully this should be a review for you from Algebra 1, and you have seen this stuff before. So greatest common factor is the greatest number and or variable that is a factor of both terms. Okay, so here we have two terms that we're going to find the GCF of. Okay, so when you're doing GCF, you have to look at the coefficients. So we're going to find the GCF of 16 and 72, so the biggest number that both of them can be divided by. And that is going to be 8. 8 times 2 is 16, 8 times 9 is 72. Then you look at each variable. So there's an x to the fourth and an x squared. The greatest common factor there is x squared. They both have at least an x squared, so I could factor out. Both terms have y squared, so my GCF there is y squared. And then z to the third, z to the fifth, my GCF there is going to be z to the third. Okay, so the greatest common factor, I'm going to put all of these things together. So 8x squared, y squared, z to the third. Okay, if we are going to actually factor out the GCF, okay, so here's our example, 12mp plus 80m squared. First thing I got to do is find the GCF. So 12 and 80, they are both divisible by 4. All right, so I can factor a 4 out of each of them. They both also have an m. This term has a p, but this one does not, so I cannot factor out a p. So when I divide these, 12 divided by 4 is 3. My m's are going to cancel each other out, so I'm left with 3p. Over here, 80 divided by 4 is 20, and then m squared divided by m leaves me with just m. Okay, this is going to go inside parentheses, and my greatest common factor, my GCF that I pulled out, is going to go outside, and that would be the factored form of this. In your notes packet, you have this table, and it says factored version and distributed version. These are the expressions that I want you to use there. So some of these have already been factored. Okay, and so you need to decide, should they go in this side of the table, or are they distributed and still need to be factored, and you would put them on this side of the table. None of them should be matched up, so none of them go directly across from each other, because what you're going to do is, like let's say 3a times a plus 4. Let's say you think that is the factored version. You're going to put it in this column, and then next to it, you are going to actually distribute it out. So if I distributed this out, I would have 3a squared plus 12a. So none of these problems that I give you here should be across from each other. But you have to decide whether they belong in the factored version column or the distributed version column, and then you need to fill out the other side. So I want you to pause here and do that, and then when you get to class, that's the first thing we're going to check. All right, and then the last thing is factoring by grouping. So we do that when we have 4 terms. So here's our example, 2x cubed plus 4x squared minus 3x minus 6. Okay, and so the first step is we're going to split this into 2 groups. All right, so there's my 2 groups, and I'm going to find the GCF of each of those groups. So the greatest common factor here between 2x cubed and 4x squared is going to be 2x squared. That's what they both have in common. All right, so if I factor that out, 2x squared goes on the outside, and then I would be left with just x here, and then plus 2. All right, the greatest common factor between negative 3x and negative 6 would be 3. So I would have 3 here, and then I would be left with negative x minus 2. All right. Step 3, make sure the parentheses match. So what is inside the parentheses has to be exactly the same in both of them in order to do this correctly. So right now they don't match. I have x plus 2 and negative x minus 2. So 9 times out of 10 when they don't match, it's because you just need to change this factor to a negative. So if I change it and factor out a negative 3, instead of a positive 3. My first term would stay the same. Okay, and if I factored out a negative 3, then I would be left with x plus 2, and they would match up. And then my final answer, one factor is the inside, so I have x plus 2 in both of these. So x plus 2 is one of my factors. The other is the outside, meaning these two things that I factored out, my two GCFs, they become a second factor, so 2x squared minus 3, and that would be my final answer. All right, again, I went through this kind of fast because it's a review from Algebra 1, but please do not be afraid to slow this down and rewatch it, or come ask me for help in class if I went too fast for you. All right, and that's it.